Hello everyone. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the Triggler. Triggler comes packaged with Combat Utility Belt, and it allows you to set up certain triggers for when conditions are met in your game. The most common of which is an HP trigger, when the character's HP or a combatant's HP meets a certain threshold. I will be talking about how to set this up, but first let's take a look at some of the cool death triggers you can set up in your game from the player's perspective. So from the player's view, I'm going to go ahead and target the commoner, and we will see what happens when the commoner hits 0 HP. Setting a firebolt. As the firebolt comes in, you will see the animation. This animation is provided by JB2A. And then we see a chat message appear, the image change, as well as a sound effect goes through. Now let's go ahead and move our attention to the frog over here. And this frog is a little bit different. There are maybe pustules growing on top of it. My player is going to go ahead and target it. We'll see what happens when the frog hits 0 HP. Image change. There is a chat message, a sound effect, as well as a trap is set off. This is just the fireball, except it is made a little bit smaller. Let's go through how we did that. Now the first thing you want to do after installing Combat Utility Belt is you will see the Triggler on the right hand side here. Now when you see this, it might look a little bit daunting and there's a lot going on here. I would suggest ignoring everything with the advanced trigger right now. Just take a look at the top part. Now I said earlier that one of the main triggers you'll use are HP. That can be selected very easily by going to Attributes, HP, Value equals 0. What this will do is whenever a PC or NPC hits 0 HP, something will happen. We haven't actually decided what the something is yet, but this is the trigger to get started. Now, if you are interested in setting up bloody conditions, you can do that too. You could just change it to be something like this. Meaning, attributes HP, the value of it is less than 50% of the max. You could also do less than or equal to. Now if you're doing one for bloodied like this, I would suggest at the bottom hit property not 0 so that you don't have the bloody trigger happen at the same time the 0 trigger happens. We also have some other options such as abilities for all of our statistics, attributes for AC, HP, initiative, and movement, details if something happens in the bio, traits for size, damage immunity, damage resistance, vulnerability, and condition immunity. And the last one, currency. If you wanted to have, say, they gain more than 1,000 gold, a chat message appears. I haven't found them in uses for a lot of the other options here except for HP. If there's something that you can think of, please leave it down in the comments below because I'm more than interested to hear. Alright, let's go ahead and move on though with our 0 HP trigger. So here's my trigger. I've selected NPCs only because I only want the NPCs to be affected by this trigger. And then I'll save and move on from that point. If you are familiar with Combat Utility Belt, you've probably seen the right hand side here, the no apply trigger set, no remove trigger set. Well, the triggers that are here are the ones that you just created in the Triggler. So I have the unconscious status. If I wanted to apply it, I could just hit attributes, HP value equals 0, NPCs only. Now this would trigger only for NPCs right now, and it would add the unconscious status. Let's go ahead and save that and see if it works. So my commoner here is going to hit 0 HP, and as he hits 0 HP, we see the unconscious status icon appear on top of him. Now if you'll notice that when our commoner hit 0, none of the other effects that I showed off at the beginning of the video actually happened. The reason for that is my commoner is neutral, and the macro I'm about to show you only goes off if my NPC is hostile. This macro I developed with the help of CCJMK, and it can be used for a lot of different trigger effects for HP. Let's take a look at it right now. So here's the macro. I'll be putting a link to where you can find it in the description below. If you have no experience with macros or only a small amount, it may seem a little daunting at first, but let's go through it. The first thing it does is it checks to see if the token is hostile, disposition -1, and it also tests to see if the token has 0 HP. From that point forward, it goes through and filters them out. Again, testing to see, is it an NPC? And also testing to see if its name is not equal to commoner. And then if it is commoner, it is going to do stuff here. The things I have it doing right now is I have update name to burnt remains. You could have this be whatever name change you want. I have update image to the image path I want. In this case, I'm using blast marks from Forgotten Realms. And I also have it to play a sound effect using the Furnace playlist QOL. And then the last part is I have it give a chat message. You could do any of these or none of these, and I'll actually be moving on and showing how you can set up a trap as well to make your enemies into living traps that are activated upon their death. A note about this macro, we can see that we set the trigger here. This is the trigger we created earlier in Triggler, the same way you did in the combat utility belt. Now, a suggestion, if you are setting the triggers here, make sure you have a unique icon or a way to identify the macro, so that you can always find the macro later on in case you need to adapt this trigger. So, again, we can see how all of this is set up. Let's go and take a look at how to set up the trap next. The first thing you want to do is create a new player character titled Trap Effects. I've already done that with this character sheet here. After you have that, you can pull in whatever spells you want to on the character sheet, which I've done. I have my fireball here. I've modified it slightly though to change the radius as well as change the damage. Now, with this setup, I don't believe there's a way to use item attacks that don't use templates. I think you need to use templates and you need to have MIDI-QOL set up to auto-target on template creation. But assuming you're using a spell or attack that has a template, you should be good to go, and we'll move on to the next step. Here is my macro for the frog, titled Explosion Frog. You notice everything's pretty much the same, except I've replaced all uses of commoner with frog. And I also have, at the bottom here, this section of code. What this section of code handles is it handles the workflow for the trap. Now, I have let t actor equals find name trap effects. This grabs our actor we just created. And then next, it searches that actor for the item we want, which in this case, I'm using Fireball. It could be any spell, again, any spell that creates a template. And then after that, it's just going to run through t-actor, item, token, token setter. And that's it. So you just need to have the same actor name, trap effects here, and then whatever item, spell you want to use here. And then I have the same name change, I have the same image change, I just have a different playlist sound effect. Again, I need to give one more shout out to CCJMK for the help with this code. I found it to be very flexible. Just by changing some small details, you can change how the whole thing is set up. For example, if I change disposition from -1 to 0, instead of hostile creatures, now anytime a neutral creature goes to 0 HP, everything else will function. And then the same thing for 1 for friendly creatures. And you can change everything down here. This can be pretty much whatever you want to go off. If you wanted a token effect to happen, you could do that. If you wanted a chat message to be created, well, I'm doing that right now. You can see how you can set this up in the way you want. To take a closer look at the macro, the first line is the name change. You could have a different name here in the quotation marks. The second one is the image change. You can just put the file path of the image you want. You can use the tile browser to find the file path pretty easily. The second one is the playlist. The first one here is the playlist itself. The second one is the track name. And the last one here is the chat message. You can just change within these marks here. A final note, one of the bugs I did run into while using this setup is if I have a lot of templates created at the same time, some of the templates seem to stick. That is, even if I delete them, they aren't actually removed until I do a complete refresh. Regardless, I think the Triggler is a very powerful part of Combat Utility Belt, and I think it's very flexible in what you can do with it. Thank you everyone for listening, and I hope you're able to use this in your own games. As I mentioned earlier, if you can think of some more unique use cases for the other triggers other than HP, please leave them down below in the comments. Thanks everyone!